Ever watch a hurricane on the news, just barreling towards the coast, and think, what if we could just, stop it in its tracks?
It's a pretty wild thought, isn't it?
Yeah. It's today's deep dive. We're going to be talking about some pretty radical ideas on controlling hurricanes. And believe it or not, these ideas came from, from an AI.
Yeah, AI gets the old gears turning. It's pretty amazing. The just the sheer audacity of even thinking about messing with something as powerful as a hurricane. But before we really get into it, I think we need to remember what we're dealing with here.
Right. We don't want to underestimate Mother Nature, that's for sure.
No, not at all. Hurricanes, they're heat engines fueled by warm ocean water.
And that warm water, it's at the surface, right? That's the stuff that really gets these storms going.
Exactly. And the strongest winds, they're all in that eyewall, that ring around the calm center. It's where all that warm, moist air gets sucked up, and that's what feeds the entire hurricane.
So the eye wall's kind of like the hurricane's what? Like it's beating heart, pumping energy into the whole thing?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Now, before we go any further, we should probably mention we're just exploring these possibilities that the AI came up with, not saying they'd actually work or anything.
Good to know. Good to know. So what's the first radical idea on the list? What did this AI come up with?
Well, get this, using explosives. Strategically placed, of course, to try and mess with the hurricane's wind flow, like creating a pressure balloon inside the storm.
A pressure balloon. Okay, now I'm intrigued. How's that supposed to work?
So the idea is you disrupt the hurricane's structure, right? Specifically, you go for the eyewall, like we said, that's where all the energy is. The AI, it thinks that if you can cause a sudden pressure change, it might be able to throw off the whole circulation of the storm.
Okay, but we're talking about forces of nature here. Hurricanes are monsters. Could an explosion really do anything to something that big?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Think of it this way. A hurricane kicks out energy equivalent to, multiple nuclear bombs every single minute.
Every minute. That's insane. So, how do you even begin to fight against something with that kind of power?
Yeah, it's a tall order. And even if you could disrupt it, even for a little bit, hurricanes, they're resilient, they bounce back.
You're saying it's like trying to knock down a giant. It's just going to get right back up.
Exactly. Which leads us to the AI's next bright idea, which takes this whole disruption thing to, a whole other level.
What? Do tell. What else is this AI cooking up?
Instead of one big boom, how about a whole bunch of smaller ones, all timed and detonated around the eyewall?
You're saying, like, a ring of explosions. Okay, this AI is bold. I'll give it that. But how's that supposed to help?
It's all about creating a kind of constant disruption, a barrage of shock waves, right? Hopefully enough to stop the hurricane from sucking up more energy from the warm ocean water.
Okay, so instead of one punch, it's like a constant jab to the hurricane's energy source. I can see the thought process, but come on, do we even have the tech to do something like that?
And that's where the AI's master plan kind of hits a wall. Because think about it. Setting off a bunch of explosions over, tens of miles in the middle of a hurricane. It's a logistical nightmare, not to mention, what if we make things worse?
Right. There's always consequences, unintended or otherwise. Nature's pretty complex. Did this AI have any other tricks up its sleeve, or was it all about fighting fire with fire?
Well, this AI, it also thought about going after the hurricane's fuel source.
You mean the warm water?
Bingo. Remember how hurricanes, they kind of fizzle out when they hit cold water?
Yeah, I remember learning that. So are you saying we just, cool down the ocean in the hurricane's path?
That's the gist of it. This AI, it suggests, get this, setting off explosions underwater. The idea being, you mix that warm surface water with the colder stuff way down below.
So we're not going to blow up the hurricane, we're going to give it a cold shower instead.
Okay.
I'm just spitballing here. But even if that worked, wouldn't you need to cool down like a massive area of the ocean to even make a dent?
It's a huge challenge, no doubt. The ocean's vast, it's constantly moving. Even if you manage to cool down a small area, warm water would just rush right back in.
Seems like this AI might need a little refresher on just how big and powerful the ocean really is. Did it at least offer any suggestions on how to test these ideas? Without accidentally creating some kind of super hurricane in the process?
I'll give the AI this. It did come up with a testing approach that emphasizes, not blowing everything up.
That's reassuring. So how would these tests even work?
First things first, simulations. Lots and lots of simulations. Before you even think about real-world explosions, you got to model everything on a computer, right?
Like a high-stakes video game for scientists where they can hit the reset button if things go wrong.
Pretty much. The simulations, they would let scientists play around with different scenarios, see what happens, figure out the risks. If, and it's a big if, those simulations actually showed promise, then maybe you could think about doing some controlled lab experiments.
And when you say controlled, you mean like really, really controlled, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. Think small-scale explosions, highly controlled environments, maybe using big tanks of water to see how different temperatures interact.
Baby steps before we start messing with the entire ocean.
Exactly. And again, this is a huge if. But if those lab experiments somehow worked, and I mean really worked, then you might maybe consider some very, very limited field tests. And even then, you'd have to do them in the middle of nowhere, far from anyone, with tons of monitoring and safety precautions.
Can you imagine the headlines if something went wrong? Scientists create accidental hypercane. Yeah, that's not good publicity.
No kidding. And that brings up something else that often gets overlooked in these what-if scenarios. The ethics, the environmental impact, even testing these ideas, even on a small scale, it carries risks. We're talking about ecosystems, marine life, messing with the balance of nature.
It's a good reminder that hurricanes, they're a force of nature. We have to be careful, respectful, and think about the consequences. It's not just about scientific curiosity. It's about responsibility.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Which leads to another question, right? Are we so focused on controlling nature, on bending it to our will, that we're missing out on other solutions? More sustainable ones, less, well, intrusive?
What do you mean? What other solutions are out there? What can we do instead of trying to play God with hurricanes? So are we saying that trying to control hurricanes, like it's some sci-fi movie, that's not the answer? What else can we do?
Well, as much as we like to think we can control nature, it might be smarter and safer to think about adapting to hurricanes, not fighting them.
Adapting. What does that even look like? Stronger buildings? Better warning systems?
Those are definitely part of it. We can build tougher infrastructure, make sure people get warnings sooner, and even rethink how we use land to minimize the risks. But it goes deeper than that. It's a change in mindset, really. Instead of trying to be in control, we need to learn to coexist.
Coexist with hurricanes. That sounds, well, kind of impossible. How do you coexist with something that powerful and destructive?
It starts with respect, honestly. Respecting the power of these storms. We have to accept that we can't just make hurricanes disappear. But we can learn to live with them and to do that safely. That means more research, better predictions, and owning up to our own role in all of this.
I'm talking about climate change, right?
Yeah, the science is pretty clear. Warmer oceans means stronger hurricanes. So as cool as it might be to, like, steer a hurricane or weaken it, the best thing we can do, long-term, is tackle climate change head-on.
Okay, so we've explored some pretty wild ideas today, but it sounds like the real takeaway is focus on climate change and adapt to the world as it is, right?
Exactly. It's a balancing act. We respect the power of nature, but we also use our ingenuity to protect ourselves without making things worse. Maybe instead of trying to control hurricanes, we should focus on building a future where we can weather any storm. Literally.
That's kind of a humbling thought, isn't it? We like to think we're in charge, but sometimes nature has other plans.
It definitely makes you think, right? And it reminds us to approach these big, complicated problems with some humility. We're all connected, and we need to remember that.
Well, that's about all the time we have for today's deep dive on hurricanes. We've covered a lot, from the improbable to the downright audacious. Hopefully you've learned something new, or at least had your imagination sparked.
It's been quite a journey. Maybe you'll even come up with some what-ifs of your own.
And to everyone listening, thanks for joining us. We hope you leave with a sense of wonder about the natural world, and maybe a reminder that sometimes the most important questions are the ones that seem impossible. Until next time, stay curious.